مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. ماذا كنا نفعل قبل إنشاء سي-سبان قناة الكابل المخصصة لإذاعة جلسات الكونجرس وأخبار الحكومة الفيدرالية؟ كيف عرفنا ماذا كانت حكومتنا تفعل قبل عرض التلفزيون للجلسات الاستماع في الكونجرس والمؤتمرات الصحفية الرسمية؟ بعبارة أخرى، قبل سي-سبان كيف كان باستطاعتنا أن نكون مواطنين صالحين؟ للنقاش حول القناة التلفزيونية التي جاءت بالديمقراطية إلى منازلنا، يسرني أن أرحب بمؤسس سي-سبان ومنشئها براين لامب. Welcome back to داخل Washington. Well, for more than 200 years, Americans didn't see or hear their government. And then along came C-SPAN to open up American government for the American citizen. And I'm delighted to welcome the founder of C-SPAN to our show. Mr. Lamb, Brian Lamb, welcome.
Rob, thank you.
Why C-SPAN?
C-SPAN came along when there were only 3 commercial television networks. They all did about the same thing every night. It just seemed, I came here in the United States Navy and I was at the Pentagon, and when I saw what was going on up close, it just seemed that we could do more information. And then as a kid, I would walk around Washington, I'd go to the House gallery, watch the debates at night, there was nobody in the gallery, and go back home to my home in Indiana, and people didn't have a clue as to what was going on, because it's a very narrow view that we were getting on the commercial networks. So when the technology changed, which is very much in the interest of Ahura, the satellite, we could start thinking about doing things other than what would make lots and lots of money.
So tell our viewers, what does C-SPAN stand for? Who funds it? And why do they have an interest in supporting this public service programming?
Well, the best thing about C-SPAN, besides the transparency, is that it was created by a private business, not the government. So we are totally separate from the government funding. The cable television industry, which changed dramatically when the satellite was launched because of the new programming, came together as a cooperative and started C-SPAN 40 years ago. We don't make a lot of money because it's a nonprofit, and that way when we make decisions on what we cover, we don't have to worry about the ratings. So it's no ratings, no advertising, private industry, no government money, and all we do is cover the political events that go on in Washington and around the country.
So let's just explain this a little more clearly for our audience. So this is private industry doing something for the public good, and it's not public television.
Correct.
Which is a separate entity here in the United States.
It's exactly the way to explain it. And the reason that we were able to do it was the cable television executives saw the need to do something other than just movies and sports. And the news programs came along after we were created. We were created in 1979. CNN began in the middle of 1980. And MSNBC and Fox News, which are other news networks in the United States, started in the middle of the 90s.
So was Congress being televised by anybody before C-SPAN came along?
Congress was not being televised by anybody.
Was it a difficult challenge to get Congress to agree to be on TV, or and then how do you think the televising of congressional sessions and hearings itself changed how Congress operated?
Actually, Congress decided on their own to televise their sessions. House of Representatives in the United States started in '79, the United States Senate in 1986. All we did was come along in the middle of the discussion and say, if you go on television and you allow access to an entity like C-SPAN, we'll cover it gavel to gavel. We'll do the entire thing. That's how it all started.
And so congressmen who until then were fairly nameless, faceless people suddenly become almost television stars, as it were.
A bit of that. I mean, we don't appeal to everybody in the United States. We like to say that 10% of the United States, which is around 30 million people, watch us on a regular basis. The rest watch us on occasion, meaning the rest, probably another 30, 40%. And then there's a whole group of Americans that don't watch anything like this ever.
But even to have 30 million people watch anything is a huge number. So have you seen over the years Congress people acting differently, knowing that they're being televised? Is there more grandstanding? Is there more openness? How does the transparency, in your view, affect what congressmen are doing?
It's impossible to put a television camera in a room and not affect what people are talking about and how they're talking about it. I don't like to think that we've changed dramatically the way the Congress interacts. I think you'd find people that have been in Congress and in the United States Senate would say television has made a big difference with the way people act. The one thing I know for sure is that members of Congress and in the Senate have created all kinds of graphics, pictures, that they put on the floor of these institutions to dramatize what they're talking about. That's the one thing I know has changed. There's been lots and lots of those over the years.
So they use props that they then get broadcast that they can use for a commercial if they'd like.
Which makes the purists nuts. The people that think it ought to never have props on the floor drives them crazy.
Congress has so many different hearings on so many different topics. How does C-SPAN decide what to broadcast and what not?
It's decided by an editorial group. I'm not a part of that, never have been. They meet every day and look through everything that's available and decide, other than the House sessions on the floor and the Senate sessions when they're actually legislating, we always cover that, they decide what hearings to cover and what events to cover.
So do you get a little miffed when the big networks come in on a national story like, say, the Kavanaugh hearings, send all their crews, film everything, and then depart? But you're there every day, day in, day out, filming everything so that the American people can see what's going on.
Do not get miffed, although the public doesn't know this, but the other networks take all of their video from us. They don't come in and put cameras in. It's a long story and nobody's really interested, but our cameras are the only ones in the room covering those hearings, and so and we have to give it to them under the rules of the Congress. So they get it all free, and then they televise it when it's of use to their audience because they're all in a for-profit business.
So can you, I'm sure over the 40 years, there have been one or two particularly memorable moments when C-SPAN, just by filming what it films, broke real news.
There have been a lot of those moments. I think probably the first time in about 1984 when the Speaker of the House of Representatives, who, by the way, controls the cameras in the House, they won't allow our cameras only in the House. We could have put them in all the hearing rooms. But members of the Republican Party were being critical of the other side, the Democrats, and the Speaker told the cameras to pull back to show that there was nobody in the chamber. And that was probably the biggest moment in our history, because all of a sudden people that hadn't paid any attention to us wondered how all this could happen, that people were standing in front of the microphones and the cameras acting like the place was full after hours in the evening and there was nobody there.
I'm sure a lot of the people, the congressmen who weren't there, were upset about this.
Well, the people that were there were upset about it because it exposed them to having nobody in the chamber. But that all settled down after a while.
Mm-hmm. Now, C-SPAN does Congress. It broadcasts press conferences of senior government officials in the federal branch. It doesn't get to do the Supreme Court. This is one institution which is so far immune from cameras. Why is that so?
Well, it's the court's decision on whether or not they let cameras in. And I think if they really told you why they don't want cameras there, they would tell you that they don't like what's happened in their view in the House of Representatives and the Senate because they've been on television. And it's very comfortable not having a camera in the room. It is a public institution. We pay for them. They should open up to cameras. but it's their decision, and nobody can tell them what to do, because each of our branches of government decide what each of our branches of government do when it comes to the media.
So if it were up to you, you would broadcast Supreme Court hearings in a flash.
Well, considering that they only have 75 different oral arguments a year, it would be a no-brainer for us. We just incorporate it in our network.
And do you feel as though the other branch, the executive branch, gets adequate transparency, that people get to see enough of what's going on and how that branch of government functions?
I actually don't. And it's not necessarily the executive branch's problem. There are so many different agencies, regulatory bodies we call them, and there's only so much time in the day. But that's where a lot of government's done that the average person doesn't see. That's where a lot of decisions are made. But you know, if you're dealing with something, say, called trucking, people driving trucks across the country, a lot of people don't care what the regulations are. They just want the trucks to deliver their goods. So there's a limit to how much people are really interested in seeing everything up close and personal.
All right, when we come back after the break, we're going to talk not just about C-SPAN opening up governments, but we're going to talk about Brian Lamb opening up the minds of the American people in the world of books in just a moment. Again, my guest today is Brian Lamb. Brian is the executive chairman and the founder of the C-SPAN networks. He helped the cable industry launch C-SPAN 38 years ago and served as the network's chief executive officer until 2012. He isn't just a faceless executive stuck in the corner office. Brian has been in front of the camera too, as a regular on-air presence since the network's earliest days. He has interviewed every president from Richard Nixon through Barack Obama, and for 15 years interviewed 800 nonfiction authors for a weekly program called Book Notes. A native of Indiana and a Navy veteran, Brian's work with C-SPAN has been recognized with two of America's most prestigious awards, the Presidential Medal of Honor and the National Humanities Medal. He and his wife Victoria are longtime residents of Arlington, Virginia. So tell me about that experience before we talk about books. Namely, it is an unusual Washington career these days where you stay with the same place and the same institution for 38 years. You must have found something, liked it, and decided to stick with it.
Since I was a kid, I was always interested in radio. That was my first love, and I worked in it when I was in college for 5 years. Then when I went into the Navy and came to Washington, I wanted to experience politics in the government, and I had that for about 9 years. But along the way, as we've talked before, with the change in technology, I saw an opportunity to do something different. And once I started with this whole operation in 1978, actually it's been 40 years, it was the best thing that I could imagine doing. I mean, it was the best job I could imagine ever having, because I came from a small town. I wasn't particularly a good student in college, and I just loved this business. And be able to do long-form television, which had never been done before, was, you know, a real challenge and really fun.
And after all these years interviewing politicians and seeing how the system works, did you ever have the hankering to run for office yourself?
I wanted to look at the possibility of running for office when I was only 30. And I went back to my home in Indiana and checked it out, talked to people, and it turned out that this was the last thing I wanted to do.
Why?
I just didn't, I mean, you know, the fact of the matter is a politician has to be nimble. And I feel strongly about certain things. And I don't want to go hokey on you, but I mean, the truth is important to me. It always has been. And politicians are always walking around the truth because they have to get elected. They wouldn't admit that until they're gone. Once they get out of Congress, they'll admit those kind of things. But I just looked at it and said I'd have too big a difficulty changing my views all the time, and so it's the best place for me to stay where I was.
Let me ask you about books. You brought authors, hundreds of authors, to the attention and into the lives of ordinary Americans. Why books, of all the things to focus on?
It was probably personal, because when I was in school, I was not a good student, as I said, And as I got older and started reading books and following politics closely, I noticed the impact of books was significant. And we had the time. So years ago, 30-some years ago, we decided to start focusing on books. And I started this show on Sunday nights called Book Notes, where I would interview one author one time, a hardback, nonfiction, because we were a nonfiction network. And the learning for me personally was so significant that we just kept it up. And as time went by, we realized a lot of other people wanted to learn too. And then we kept expanding it. So we do now 48 hours every weekend on one of our channels, all about books. It's constant books every weekend.
So it sounds like even in this internet age, you still believe there's a future for books.
Not only do I believe it, I know there is a future for books. The sales keep going up instead of down. And that's a very significant thing that I think people were surprised about, that people still are reading, and there are more authors than ever, and there are more books published than ever.
So let me now connect the people that you tend to put on the air the other days of the week, and then the authors. Do our congressmen and our leaders and our senators read enough books?
I don't know, because I don't know them all. Some read a lot, and they have a very interesting system so that they can keep up. Members of Congress tend to be people that are interested in history. And so most of them, you know, and again, I don't know them all, but most of them, when you do get to talk to them, will tell you a book that they're reading. We send our cameras over to Congress all the time and ask them, what books are you reading? And put that on our channel when we talk about books.
People aren't going to admit reading the latest racy novel.
Yeah, they do sometimes.
Oh, really?
Yeah. You know, I mean, it's, if you're in politics, most people that I know in politics are reading nonfiction. But you'd be surprised.
It's a brave congressman who admits to reading 50 Shades of Grey. All right. So you must have a very good sense, after all these years, of what Americans know about their government and what they don't know very much about their government. What parts of government do you think Americans need to know more about? That they don't understand our system, or our system is too complicated? What do Americans need to know more about?
They know too much about the president and too little about Congress and the Supreme Court. 10% of our population know a lot, but the rest are not paying close attention, or we wouldn't have a $21.5 trillion debt. It's a very complicated process. Language of politics is hard to understand. So the public tends to, they just pay attention to the personality in the Oval Office, in the White House. And that's been an imbalance. And that's one of the things that we've tried to do, is let people who are interested see the Congress and how it makes legislation. And sadly, we can't show the Supreme Court, but we do something that for a lot of people would be very boring. We take the still pictures of the members of the Supreme Court, put it on the screen, run the audio only, so that we can get on the record these decisions and the oral arguments. And it's not great television, but we hope that it passes on to the average person a chance to hear what the court sounds like.
So the Supreme Court allows audio tapes, but just not video tapes.
That's new within the last several years. It didn't used to, it had an audio a copy of every argument, but they didn't release it until 6 months after the end of the term in July. And that meant that we were way behind, and now they release it at the end of the week.
So knowing what you know, if you could give advice to the educators who draft curricula for civics classes for high school kids around America, what more would go into that curriculum?
If it were me, and it won't be me, I would tell them to begin teaching the incredible importance of money and how a bill is passed.
What would you say is the next big frontier for public interest broadcasting?
You know, there's so many outlets now, and there's so much television, and there's so many social media places you can go. The public at large is going to keep adding to it. The real trick today is the individual has to be interested enough to go find it and to look at it and try to figure it out. And when I was growing up with the 3 networks, the big responsibility was on the networks. No more. It's on us now completely. It's there if you want it. If you don't want it, you can ignore it and go ahead and live your life and not worry about it. But someday, this expenditure of money by people in this town that we don't have is going to catch up with us, and the public will have nobody to blame but themselves.
Brian Lamb, on behalf of all Americans, thank you for helping educate us, 2 generations of us, on how our government really works.
Thanks, Rob.
So there's an incredible amount of coordination that's required to respond to a disaster, and working with partners is absolutely essential to making sure this all goes smoothly. And the coordination between federal government, local government, state government is tighter than anything I've experienced in the last 10 years at the American Red Cross. And also, we work with a lot of different relief agencies, and that is essential for us to be successful as well.
30 years ago, when I was researching my doctoral dissertation, I drove every day from an apartment in Oxford to the Public Record Office in London, the repository of the British government's official files. For 7 hours a day, I read through page after page of documents stamped confidential, secret, and top secret, sifting through what the British government at one time considered its most carefully guarded secrets. I also looked through secret files in the National Archives here in Washington and in archives even in different Middle East capitals. That experience made me a big believer in the value of transparency. It is easy for government, any government, to hold meetings in secret, keep reporters and citizens away from where real decisions are being made, and declare a document classified, filing it away for 30, 50, or more years. This is the natural order of business for authoritarian regimes. Democracies, however, need to fight a bureaucratic instinct to secrecy and may need some help to do so. Obviously, real secrets need to be kept secret, but not every government decision is a secret. And just because something may be embarrassing doesn't mean it deserves to be hidden away like the nuclear weapons codes. To be good citizens, we need to know. We need to know how government operates. We need to know on what information government officials base their decisions. We need to know what outside influences impact those decisions. We need to have people doing this work for us. We call them journalists. We need to have access to the people who make decisions. We call them press conferences. And eventually, we need to have the documents they produce. We call them archives. C-SPAN is part of this transparency. Declassification of government papers is another part of it. Freedom of the press is an even more critical part of it. Journalists are not enemies of the people any more than archives are cemeteries where documents go to die. To the contrary, they are all key building blocks of our democracy. We need them to tell stories, to check facts, to keep our leaders honest. We need them now more than ever. So don't hate journalists. Instead, let's thank them. بهذا نصل إلى نهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة وخاصة حول أهمية الشفافية في الحكومة، أرجو أن تتواصلوا معي عبر تويتر على هاشتاغ Inside Washington أو أن تراسلوني مباشرة على @RobSatloff. سأراكم الأسبوع المقبل وإلى أن ألقاكم شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.